Maggie Voisin on deck.
On course.
Let's get loud for Maggie Voisin.
First American competitor to win ski slopestyle gold here, by the way.
On the bubble for the Olympic team standing, so this is a big run in Maggie's career.
Climate change is 100% affecting our sport.
Maggie Voisin with a big run right where she needed it.
I started skiing when I was 3 years old, and I've been skiing Big Mountain for 20 years. I come from a ski family. My dad's a ski bum, so, you know, skiing is in my blood. I was born to do it. I couldn't imagine my life any other way. I wouldn't know who I am without it. I'm 23 years old, and I've been fortunate enough to compete at 3 Winter Olympic Games. Skiing's my life. I hope to keep skiing, but the sad reality is that the 3 Winter Olympic sites that I've competed at won't be able to host another Winter Olympics by the end of the century.
It's as hot right now as the Earth has been in 125,000 years, and the CO2 level is at a parts per million that it hasn't been in for a lot longer than that. Where I used to see a head wall with a glacier all across it, shining, glistening in the sun, now I see little patches of snow and a dirty meltwater lake below it. The reason I like to live here are grizzly bears and mountain goats and wolverines and white-tailed ptarmigan and pikas, all of which depend on the great high country we have around here and cool temperatures and lingering snowpack. And they're all under pressure.
Climate's kind of a funny term, and it can evoke a lot of emotions. You know, you hear about global warming, long-term drought, climate change. Regardless of the adjective, the reality is annual conditions, temperature, and precip are changing. What we've noticed the last few summers in particular, the last 10, it appears that the temperatures in many of Montana's famed blue ribbon trout rivers and trout streams, if you will, are being subject to more warmer temperatures earlier and longer, which translates into physiological stress for different fish species. There are going to be periods now in the summer where Fish, Wildlife and Parks is probably going to close fishing in certain rivers and certain streams due to elevated stream water temperatures.
Whitebark pine has become a very important species in the last 10-15 years of my career because it was realized that that species has a critical role in the high elevation habitats and high elevation ecosystems here around the Flathead National Forest.
Whitebark pine is known as a keystone species or a foundation species, and the reason is because if you remove it from the landscape, you remove abundant other species, both plant, animal, insects, and so on, that depend on whitebark. Besides providing food for wildlife, one of the big things is it stabilizes snowpack. And this allows higher quality water to be dispersed down into our streams over a longer period of time, so that we don't get all our water in our valleys at the same time.
Snow retention is a really important factor for a ski area, and if we lose the whitebark pine,
we not only lose the sport that we love, but we also lose an ecosystem that we love.
The whitebark on the Flathead has lost about 90% of its historical range for what it used to be in the population across the forest. And now we're primarily dealing with about 5 to 10% of what's left of the population.
The repeat photography project was actually very useful for our research project, as well as being a very, very good communication tool. When you finally navigate your way through the wilderness and come over a ridge and look down on a glacier basin, and you're holding a photo from 50 or 60 or 100 years ago, it's pretty startling. It doesn't look like the same place. Up at Grinnell Glacier, for instance, there's a place where bighorn sheep were munching on vegetation, and that had been under ice only 50 years ago. It had been under 200 feet of ice. I think the takeaway from a lot of our research is no, things can change, they are changing, and it didn't take as much climate change to do that as we would have thought.
Because of climate change, it appears we're going to have more fire on the landscape in the future.
When fire season starts in the end of July and goes through August and hopefully stops in September, I've always been used to that as normal. It's when it starts in mid-June and goes all the way through mid-September. You know, we tend to get tired of the smoke, and 3 months of smoke is not fun for anybody.
I think this is something that our country is going to be grappling with quite a bit. A few years back, some of the intense fires on the West Coast, the smoke plume reached all the way to New York City. And so it's not just us in the fire-prone West that are going to be experiencing more smoke. It's going to affect a lot of people.
Whitefish is a little ahead of the curve, frankly, and I think Whitefish is poised to model some of that behavior for other mountain towns.
Small changes, that's what we can do here. We can probably do some pretty big ones, and I think we can be a leader.
Community, culture, and conservation all intersect here in Whitefish. Most of us that live here in Whitefish love all three, and it's our identity, and everything's connected.
We've been able to divert thousands of gallons of waste away from the landfill, which of course is reducing greenhouse gases. So every person who comes to the market is contributing a little bit toward improving the climate and improving the planet.
Globally, landfills and wastewater will emit 67 million metric tons of methane annually. When you think of our landfill here and how fast it's growing, we're just taking the steps to try and make sure that our little neck of the woods isn't increasing and isn't emitting that much methane as much as possible, especially since we're right next to all those glaciers over there.
The Flathead National Forest has worked with the Whitefish Mountain Resort, is a great partner in trying to promote white bark pine in and around the ski resort. We've worked with the resort on getting the ski resort as a certified ski area that promotes white bark pine restoration efforts. Just this last year, we planted a 2-acre piece of ground just northwest of Summit House.
I think as communities come together, like Whitefish, to do things like protecting our winters or the climate change initiative at City Council for the City of Whitefish, those bring the community together, they inform people, they increase awareness, and nothing but good can come out of that.
Well, in 2018, we adopted the Climate Action Plan, and first and foremost, it was to ensure that this town is and remains resilient to a changing climate. Bottom line, we're looking at one of the most important economic drivers to the city of Whitefish and our local economy, Whitefish Lake and Big Mountain. And under a changing climate, it's a pretty dire outlook. And so the initiatives we're taking will hopefully secure and safeguard our water resources, protect our winters, and also protect our municipal watershed supply.
75 years in the future, winter will be very, very different here unless we take pretty immediate and pretty serious action. A recent study in global environmental change looked at ski areas all across the country, and many of them lost 50 to 80% of their ski days. In a particular scenario that should apply largely to Whitefish Mountain Resort, they currently have about 128 operating days. Unfortunately, under the dire scenario, by 2050, they would only have 56 days a year, less than half of what they have now. By 2090, they would only have 14. 14 is not viable for a ski area to operate.
It's just, it's heartbreaking, and it's happening. And I really hope that people are opening up their eyes to what's happening, because it's obvious and it's here, and we need to make a change. Skiing with the younger generation and young kids is one of my favorite things in the entire world. You know, let alone, they just look at a world in a whole different light, from a brighter lens, and then you follow them down a mountain and everything is fun. Their perspective is so different on the mountain. And they're just hooting and hollering and finding every little tree run and every little jump and jib that you can possibly find. And it brings me back to my true self and my roots and how I grew up and how much I love skiing and why I started skiing.
Well, it's time to have a little fun.
Experiencing winter has made me who I am, and I can't imagine a world where future generations wouldn't get to experience that. We won't be perfect, but we have to try. Protect our winters.
And all the world turns shades of gray. And that powder starts to fly, and we steer Rocky Mountain high. From the face shots we receive the livelong day. Meats in the freezer, let's go.